What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about the end of US dollar dominance. What? Is this really a thing? Because that would be very, very bad for us. The fact that so many countries around the world have agreed to use the United States dollar as a reserve currency has been a massive benefit to us. It is one of the best things that the United States has going for us. So the idea that that could go away is honestly scary. I actually think that a lot of Americans out there would actually be in denial that this could actually happen. So today, I really want to check out this video by TLDR News and learn about if this really could be the end of US dollar dominance in the world. So let's take a look.
Since at least the end of World War II, the US dollar has been the world's dominant currency. It's the currency that financial institutions across the world overwhelmingly prefer to hold as reserves.
Right.
It denominates most international trade, and it's the global benchmark for other currencies.
And like I already said, that is a massive benefit to the United States. Like, that alone probably explains like a lot of the success that we have had as a country, among other things that we've done well, but that's special. Like, that's a huge privilege and a massive benefit. Like, yeah, so oof. The fact that we might have screwed things up so badly that this could go away, like if countries around the world don't trust us or don't like us, for whatever reason don't want to use the United States dollar, the fact that we might have screwed this up for ourselves, really, is so freaking bad.
However, in recent months, a confluence of factors, including America's ballooning debt pile, Trump's unpredictable trade policies, his revealed disdain for central bank independence, and his administration's willingness to use dollar-based sanctions against not just rogue states like Iran and Russia, but also ICC judges and European policymakers, have sparked speculation that the dollar's long-standing dominance might finally be coming to an end.
Oh my god. Yeah, when you put it like that, it's hard to deny. Like, there's been so many things that would, influence the rest of the world to move away from the United States, and that includes the US dollar. And I'm honestly curious, like, how realistic this is, like, how people are feeling about this. Like, are countries already starting to try to move away? Like, is this happening already? Like, how bad is this? How bad is this?
So in this video, we thought we'd take another look at what might come next, and whether it'll be better or worse than what preceded it. So the first thing to say is that the dollar's demise is by no means certain. The US dollar has defied the doomsayers many times before, and still accounts for a majority of all foreign exchange reserves.
This is really why I was already, like, kind of asking that question, like, how likely is this? Like, I do understand right now that countries are trying to distance themselves from the US, not have to rely on us for stuff. We've been extremely unpredictable, like, mostly because of Donald Trump, let's be honest, and he's literally made threats and insults and, like, is extremely unpredictable just from a financial point of view. Like, it might not make sense to trust in the US dollar, but with that all being said, it's that's like the basis of like the global financial system, you know? That's not something that's very easily replaceable or easy to change, which again, that's we're very fortunate for that. It's very lucky for us that that's sticky, that's difficult to change, because we, America doesn't want this to change.
About 90% of all foreign exchange transactions and more than 50% of all export invoicing. The dollar's persistence reflects some fundamental strengths, including the size of the US economy, its relative openness, and the depth of its capital markets, which make it easier to borrow and trade in dollars. But it also reflects the staying power of what are known as network effects. In other words, everyone uses the dollar because, well, everyone else already uses the dollar, which means it's very hard to quit.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Like, at this point, it's popular to use because it's popular, you know? Like, that's kind of at a certain point how things work. Like, you use it because it's the most used. And that's hard to change. So, again, that's really good news for us, because just from some of the sentiments and opinions that I have heard from like other countries around the world, I actually think a lot of people would be very excited to like move away from the US dollar if that was a possibility.
Nonetheless, there are signs that the era of dollar dominance might finally be coming to a close. Its share of reserves fell to a 25-year low last year. The rise of gold could plausibly be construed as a symptom of waning confidence in the dollar.
Its amount of global reserves is like at all-time lows. That's interesting. This isn't the kind of thing that they really talk about much here in the United States, like how poorly this is doing. So even if it doesn't change like immediately, there are some serious signs here that people are not as interested in using the dollar.
The dollar, and perhaps most notably, the dollar has decoupled from American bond yields for the first time in recent history. For context, when the
Okay.
dollar fell in the past, US borrowing costs usually fell as well, in large part because, in the same way that the US dollar is the world's favourite currency, US bonds are the world's favourite debt instruments. This meant that, when people moved out of dollars, they often moved into US bonds, and thus pushed down yields, effectively moving from one reserve asset to another. That
Okay.
this hasn't happened in the past year or so reflects the fact that neither the dollar nor US bonds are seen as quite as safe as they once were.
So it sounds like he's saying that around the world, people are starting to get out of US dollars as the reserve, and they're not taking that money and reinvesting it into the United States. They're not buying US bonds or treasuries or whatever. They're getting out of US dollars and putting it into something else that might have nothing to do with the United States. So that's a very alarming signal.
Now, none of this suggests the dollar's demise is imminent, but it's worth noting that network effects generally act as a sort of dam. They contain and stem the original pressure, but once a critical threshold is reached and the proverbial dam breaks, things can unravel quite suddenly.
I was hoping to hear like, nah, this isn't happening. Nothing to worry about. There's definitely some signs going on here, like literally statistics and data that are showing that interest in the U.S. dollar is going down. So this is alarming. Like, even if this doesn't happen overnight, this is alarming. Like, this should be more of something we're talking about here in the United States. I really think one of our biggest flaws is that we think as a country, oh, it will always be like this. Like, the United States will always be wealthy or powerful or influential, or like, we just assume it's always going to be like that. And the times are literally changing before our eyes right now. And I think a lot of Americans are in denial about that.
Especially if some competitor is beginning to enjoy the positive benefits of network effects itself. This is what happened to MySpace, for instance. Network effects protected it from Facebook until late 2008, when the dam suddenly broke. This
see.
happened, not coincidentally, at about the same time as Facebook was beginning to enjoy the positive effects of network effects.
So, something is popular until it's not, until like a certain threshold is met, and then it very quickly goes away and is replaced by something else. This is like he's calling it the network effect. I guess this is like a well-known effect. Like, whatever is the most popular thing, you get a lot of benefits from that. And even being the most popular thing keeps you the most popular thing, because everyone just gravitates towards the most popular, whatever you're talking about, whether it's money or social media websites or whatever. But according to this, once it starts declining and it meets a certain threshold, the popularity completely dumps off at a certain point, which is very scary, because that's kind of looking like the beginning of what's happening to the US dollar,
as evidenced by its exponential growth in this period. It's not impossible to imagine something similar, albeit not quite as dramatic, happening to the dollar, especially if some other currency emerges as a viable alternative.
So what would be the viable alternative? Like, in my mind, I don't know too much about currencies, but like the euro, for one thing, that's probably like number one in my mind. Yeah, unless like maybe are they like looking at Chinese currencies or like what?
The moment of maximum vulnerability could plausibly come later in the year, once current Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has been replaced with Trump's chosen successor, Kevin Warsh. Warsh is generally seen as a less political choice than some of the other potential candidates, but if he ends up being yet another yes man and, say, drastically cuts interest rates while inflation is well above the Fed's 2% target, you can imagine the inflationary risks becoming so acute that the proverbial dam just breaks.
So it sounds like he's saying we're going to have some changes in the U.S. government, in the financial system, and depending on some of our decisions in the next year or so, like if the US dollar, if inflation gets out of control and the value of the US dollar keeps going down, that's another thing that could incentivize people to go to some other currency.
Anyway, however it happens, the point we're trying to make is that the end of dollar dominance no longer seems far-fetched. So,
Wow.
What would succeed it?
Wow. That's, you can't just like gloss over that statement. That is huge, like for the US, not in a good way. That is so important. Like, if there's anything we can be doing to stop this, we need to be doing it. Because, like, selfishly, I have to say, this is so bad for the US, but we seem to have done it to ourselves. So maybe it's what we deserve, but the fact that this is like a realistic conversation that's being had, it is scary. I didn't know it had gone this far, that it had gotten this bad for us.
Well, in the short term, the most likely outcome is some sort of multipolar currency system. After all, the dollar isn't going to suddenly disappear. It's been the world's reserve currency for decades, and the
Sure.
US will continue to be one of the world's two largest economies for the foreseeable future.
Sure.
In such a multipolar order, the dollar will still play a role, but alongside, rather than above, other major currencies like the euro, yen, and yuan.
Okay, so it does include the euro and some other Asian currencies, and yeah, this is not what the if you ask any American out there, we love that the US dollar is like the top currency. Like we love to think of it that way. We love it. We love to be able to issue debt without worrying. We love being able to print money without worrying. It is like a superpower. And we should be protecting that at all costs instead of pushing everyone away.
This sort of multipolar system will probably have a regional element. You can imagine, for instance, the euro dominating in Europe, the dollar dominating in the Americas, and the yuan dominating in the Asia Pacific.
Sure.
Now, some people like the idea of a multipolar currency order. It would give the US less unilateral leverage and make other regions less dependent on the US economy.
Honestly, looking at this from an outside point of view, like if I was not an American, I would like a different system. I would like not having to it would be annoying like to have to depend on the US dollar. So I do understand how a lot of people would probably be okay with this changing.
Which has been a key factor in recent financial crises. It's also worth noting that currency blocks were the norm until the gold standard emerged in the late 1800s.
Okay.
However, others aren't so relaxed about this prospect. Our collective reliance on the dollar has long acted as a sort of financial lubricant. Moving to other currencies would introduce some new exchange rate risk in international trade.
Also, it's like just having one currency is like a globally accepted currency is convenient. It makes things easy, I think. So maybe it won't be the dollar. Maybe it will be like that was kind of what they thought like Bitcoin or Ethereum was supposed to be or gonna be. I don't know how realistic that is. Like maybe in the future, who knows? Or like, but it seems like there are benefits to having like one global currency, like whatever that could be.
Making everything slightly more expensive. There's also the risk of massive currency runs. In a multipolar order, if the economy of one currency bloc were to face some sort of crisis, this could trigger a destabilizing flight out of that currency into one of the other alternatives, with destabilizing consequences. There's also a coordination problem. In the inevitable event of a crisis, central banks within different currency blocs will have to work with one another to fight it off effectively, as opposed to the situation at the moment, where the Federal Reserve does most of the firefighting by itself, and the world's other central banks basically just ask it from dollars if needed.
Huh. So there is actually some like good things about having like one stable, reliable currency. It's just that the United States doesn't really fit that description.
More generally, it's possible that no single currency bloc will be willing or able to, on their own, provide the public goods we all currently enjoy under the dollar, like institutionalized free trade policy, a steady supply of safe assets, and super deep capital markets.
Okay.
In this case, the transition from a unipolar to multipolar currency order would be bad for the global economy, and probably politically destabilizing. This potential pitfall is sometimes known as the Kindleberger trap.
Well, again, this is really good news from an American point of view. It turns out like it's difficult and slow to get away from the US dollar. So on one hand, it seems to be happening, but on the other hand, like it's not for sure, and there's a lot of benefits to using the dollar, but it seems to be happening, but it might not. I'm not really sure. I think the future is so uncertain.
Concept named after the historian Charles Kindleberger, who argued that the economic chaos of the interwar era was in part a consequence of America's reluctance or inability to assume the responsibilities of global leadership following the decline of the UK as the preeminent world power. If this analysis is correct, it's very possible that, after a brief but turbulent flirtation with the multipolar system, the world once again tends back towards some sort of unipolar currency order. This is obviously a long way off, so it's basically impossible to say what the new dominant currency might be.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be the US dollar again, but a funkier future, perhaps centered around some sort of commodity, much like the gold standard of old, is at least conceivable. As we mentioned earlier, the latest...
Yeah, and then they make like a little alluding to Bitcoin or some kind of decentralized global currency or something that's trustless, and I don't know, that might be cool in the future, some kind of digital currency or something, but who knows? That's kind of what they were saying at the end here, like who knows? But just the fact that there's so much discussion and so much data, real world data showing that the US dollar is becoming less and less popular, this was super like eye-opening, like alarming to me. Every American should like be way more aware of this. This is just like another indication that the world is kind of sick of the United States and moving away from us, and we are pissing everyone off and we are pushing everyone away. And that is not, as an American, that's not a fun thing to think about. That's not the future of the US is not like, I don't know what we have to look forward to. It just seems to be declining, and this is yet another thing. So, yeah, I'm glad to be educated about this, but it's a bit depressing for the US. So, anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on the US dollar. If you would like to move away from it, or if you think it's possible, or what could replace it, or any of this, that'd be really interesting to hear about, especially if you're outside the US. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.